Welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Around July 1st, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu plans to ask Israel's parliament to vote on the annexation of certain Jewish communities in the West Bank, Israel's biblical heartland. But what impact will this have on Israel, the U.S., and the people living in Judea and Samaria? We talked to some Middle East analysts about what they thought about the plan and its consequences. From the Middle East to Europe and across the Atlantic, world leaders are debating whether Israel can annex nearly one-third of the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. But David Parsons sees the term annexation as misleading, since Israel is not seizing land.
Because they are essentially just asserting their title to something that they already have a right and claim to. The international community recognized it 100 years ago at the San Remo Conference, 1920, the League of Nations mandate, 1922, that the Jewish people have a claim to this entire land.
President Trump's so-called deal of the century triggered the possible claim to the land.
What's interesting is that President Trump has said if the Palestinians won't come to the table right away, Israel can start the process of incorporating this 30%, up to 30%, into the modern sovereign state of Israel.
After meeting with advisors to both Netanyahu and alternate Prime Minister Benny Gantz, Joel Rosenberg says they don't see eye to eye on this issue.
When I sit with close advisors to Prime Minister Netanyahu, they make a very interesting case. They say, okay, Joel, why is this summer different from all other summers? We didn't pick this summer. The President of the United States is the first president in history to lay out a peace plan that allows us to have more territory in biblical lands than we ever have been offered by, nobody has ever offered us that. When you talk to the close advisors to Defense Minister, alternate Prime Minister Benny Gantz, they say, well, we support that, the idea, and we support the President's peace plan. However, is this the right moment?
Many leaders in Judea and Samaria are also divided. Some believe the current plan risks certain Jewish communities.
There are around 15 significant Israeli settlements that will probably be dried up. They will have to, it doesn't force them to leave, but they'll probably have to leave on their own because they don't see any future as a little enclave surrounded by a Palestinian state.
While the plan allows Israel to vote for sovereignty, it would also establish a Palestinian state under these conditions. The Palestinian Authority must recognize Israel as a Jewish state, renounce terrorism, stop incitement, and end payments to convicted terrorists.
Only then we start negotiations, which can lead up to 4 years. The American ambassador called it that the Palestinians will turn into Canadians. I prefer the biblical expression that wolves will turn into sheep, and then the reality will look completely different.
Some argue, while it's unlikely the PA will turn into sheep, the Bible warns against giving away land God promised to the Jewish people.
It's difficult to even explain it this way, but I've followed the pattern for 20 plus years, Chris, and this pattern fits that the God of Israel is not pleased about dividing Judea and Samaria for a future Palestinian state.
Koenig says he's witnessed more than a 20-year pattern where the U.S. reaps consequences when it forces Israel to give away its God-given land.
So I've been documenting what happens when the United States applies pressure on Israel to divide their covenant land. In my book, Eye to Eye, I documented 127 events through Hurricane Harvey that happened at the time or right at within the first 24 to 48 hours of U.S. pressure on Israel to divide their covenant land.
Parsons explains the plan would also put many important Jewish and Christian archaeological sites under a future Palestinian state.
There are hundreds of other important Bible sites to Jews and Christians throughout all these areas that would probably be lost, and the Palestinian Authority already has a record of not being a real guardian, custodian of these sites. In fact, the record shows they try and erase it and replace it with their own Islamic narrative.